And so without further ado, let me introduce our two teachers, James Baraz and Kaira Lingo. James Baraz has been a meditation teacher since 1978. In 2003, he created the Awakening Joy online course, which he has taught across the US and the United States and abroad. He is the co-founding teacher of the Spirit Rock Meditation Center. He is also the author of Awakening Joy and Awakening Joy for Children, which is a recent title. Kaira Lingo is a Buddhist meditation teacher with a focus on activists, people of color, artists, educators, and families. She edited the Thich Nhat Hanh book, Planting Seeds, Practicing Mindfulness with Children. She was an ordained nun of 15 years in Thich Nhat Hanh's Order of Interbeing. And she is now a lay Dharma teacher based in Washington, D.C. James, Kaira, thank you for being with us. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for this time. So we'll begin with a short meditation. And I invite us to just connect with our bodies and whatever we're sitting on, to just allow ourselves to arrive. We just heard a lot of information, and we may be feeling the connection with all the different people on this call. So we can settle into this space that we're creating together. And I will offer us 3 sounds of the bell. And as we listen to the bell, we can feel our breath flowing in, flowing out, knowing that 200 other people are breathing with us in this moment. So allowing yourself the fullness of your breathing, to fully experience this very in-breath, and to fully be there for this very out-breath. Allowing yourself the luxury of just being with what is. Just this moment. not the past, not the future. Occupying fully the here and now. Breathing in, being aware of your whole body. Breathing out, allowing your body to rest, to give its weight up to the support of the earth. Right in this moment, there's nowhere to go, nothing to do. Giving ourselves permission to rest. To be with this moment as it is. And if you feel you would like to just practice with a smile, either an inner smile or a smile across your lips, across your face. A smile to the 200 other people practicing with us in this moment. A smile to your own goodness, to your own beautiful heart that has brought you to this webinar today, because you care deeply. A smile in recognition of all beings everywhere who are mindfully engaging to address suffering, to build joy. And listen to one sound of the bell to close.
Okay, so now I guess it's me, right?
Yeah.
Well, first I want to thank Parallax Press for organizing this and getting us all together, and thank you, Kaira Jewel, for being on this with me. It's been fun getting to know you a bit, and thank you for that meditation that brought us here. So as Stephen said at the outset, I'll be talking and sharing some thoughts for about 15 minutes or so. Let me put my timer on here, so I'm with the program. And then Kaira Jewel will be doing the same, and then we'll have a a conversation between us for a little while, and then we'll open it up to everybody on the call. So first, I want to just address the fact of this mindful resistance series. This is the name of the series. And are there going to be a number of these, Stephen, or is it going to be? My understanding was when you said series, there'll be a few, or there have been a few. And it's an interesting name, mindful resistance. I love the mindful part, and I also can resonate with the resistance to greed, hatred, and delusion. But in my mind, we're not only exploring what we're resisting, what we're against, but what we're for as well. So I just want to put that in as well, that this is hopefully going to generate more inspiration and more caring and more action, and having us stay connected to an inspiring vision of what we want to create besides what we want to resist. And I'll share a few thoughts first from the Buddhist perspective, or traditional Buddhist perspective. Sometimes people have said, well, I don't know about engagement. Is that really Dharma? And, you get mixed up with politics. And is that what the Buddha really taught? And want to just put out for those who might not be familiar that the Buddha was himself involved in political issues of his time. There's a couple of instances where there were going to be there were wars over water rights, and the Buddha tried to intercede to stop the conflicts. One time he was successful, and one time he wasn't. And there were a number of. He was a consultant to kings and political figures. And in that, as probably you're familiar with a very famous statement of the Buddha's that I'd like us to keep in mind as we are trying to sort out what our relationship is to current reality. One of the most famous quotes of the Buddha's that is often mentioned and inspiring, where he says, hatred never ceases by hatred. Hatred ceases by love alone. This is an ancient and eternal law. This is a tall order, but this is what we're asked to somehow connect in our hearts. As much as there's anger and outrage and disbelief and concern and anxiety and fear about what's to come and where we're headed, that underneath that outrage or whatever emotions come up is a caring heart. That's why we get so distraught and disturbed, because there's a place in us that cares about this planet, that cares about humanity, that cares about the suffering that's going on. And so our task is to, particularly as practitioners, to stay connected to that caring heart, along with honoring and respecting all the feelings that naturally come up. If you didn't feel concern or outrage or anger, then you probably are cut off from your feelings. So it's both to honor them, hold them, respect them, and go underneath to a place of deeper connection. Because in my mind, that will be the most magnetizing energy that other people are inspired by. Fear and anger and hatred can only go so far. It can motivate us, but it's not so sustainable and not so inspiring as an ongoing source of our actions. We're at a very interesting time in humanity's development, and I just want to mention a teaching from the great historian Arnold Toynbee, in case you aren't familiar with it. It's always inspired me. Arnold Toynbee, probably the most respected historian from the 20th century, and he was exposed to Buddhism, and towards the end of his life, he said, looking back, he thought that perhaps the most significant development in the 20th century will have been Buddhism coming to the West. That's an extraordinary foresight, and whether you call it Buddhism or consciousness or the Dharma or just waking up, I think he's right. We have this opportunity. You don't have to call it Buddhism, but waking up is what we're called to do. And it's happening. Maybe it's not an accident that there's a mindfulness explosion, and that all of this interest in more and more consciousness. As one of my friends says, we're in a race between fear and consciousness. And the more we can be agents of that consciousness, the more we're contributing in a very meaningful way. I wanted also, just in case there are those who are wondering, if I can find it, about how this is relevant to the Dharma, I want to quote Bhikkhu Bodhi, the premier translator of the Pali Canon, in a very beautiful essay, which is called A Challenge to Buddhists. You can Google this. I'll just read a little excerpt of it. He says, the special challenge facing Buddhism in our age is to stand up as an advocate for justice in the world, a voice of conscience for those victims of social, economic, and political injustice who can't stand up and speak for themselves. This, in my view, is a deeply moral challenge, marking a watershed moment in modern expression of Buddhism. I believe it also points in a direction that Buddhism should take if it's to share in the Buddha's ongoing mission to humanity. This is the premier translator of the Pali Canon, saying it's up to us not to just sit on our cushion, but to contribute in a meaningful way. Okay, so as far as looking at this reality, how can we bring our practice to this situation in a meaningful way that deepens our own understanding and is contributing in a positive way? First, as far as our fear about where we are or where we're headed, I always like to see the bigger picture, which for me, the Dharma keeps us looking again and again at how things change. And that if you take any one slice of the moment, it can be scary. But if you see over time how one thing leads to another, as it's famously said, because of this, this arises, because of that, that arises, causes and conditions. As scary as things can be, you might find yourself biting your nails or saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe what's happening now. There is something that has been unleashed that we could never have predicted. That in this new reality, there is a sense of mobilization and action and connection that our leaders have catalyzed unwittingly. I sometimes think of Donald Trump, this might be a stretch for some, but as an unwitting bodhisattva called to wake us all up. Unwitting, for sure. Maybe he took some vow in some former life and said, okay, I will be the ultimate anti-dharma conveyor that wakes us up. But for many people, including myself, I have not felt a sense of patriotism like I do now, true patriotism in the American ideal that I was under the impression of since John F. Kennedy. It's like, yeah, all of those ideals that are in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence that we rarely live up to, but are right there. That's what's always inspired me, or did when I was a child. And they're inspiring a lot of people again, saying, we believe in that vision of America. So as I often like to think of it, the light brings out the shadow. No, too much light. And the shadow brings out the light. And there's more light than ever before. Even as recently as the climate issue with the Paris agreements and Trump leaving the Paris Accord. There we are, California and New York and Washington and a number of other states and many, many cities saying, we are in this. So I just want to see that something has been happening that's very exciting. And if we see that coming together as a caring, bigger community is this incredible opportunity, it's very encouraging. As Andrew Harvey says in his beautiful book, I want to mention this book. This is called The Hope, A Guide to Sacred Activism by Andrew Harvey. I love this book, The Hope, A Guide to Sacred Activism. He says, like in the spiritual journey, it's called The Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross, where you go through the hardest times and come out through awakening. And he says that humanity is right now in its, what he calls the dark night of the species, where we are in this place, this crucible of awakening that can lead to opportunities that we didn't see possible. So just want to hold that as a possibility, and also find ways to deal with our pain and our fear, whether it's a self-compassion break. And I would highly recommend, whenever you're getting freaked out, just put your hand on your heart and saying, wow, this is hard. Try it with me right now. Just putting your hand on your heart, which releases a lot of oxytocin and stimulates the vagus nerve and calms down physiologically the system. Wow, this is hard. And this is part of life. Suffering is a part of life. And let me hold this suffering or this pain with kindness and compassion. And then as you honor all of those feelings, you're more motivated to act from a place of connection. So I think I'll stop here. There's much more that that maybe will come out in our conversation, but I think that we have an incredible opportunity here, and the more we can bring our Dharma practice to bear on it, the better for ourselves internally and for everybody externally. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Very inspiring what you've just been sharing. And I want to pick up on your last point on the possibility of this moment and how we can meet this time with enthusiasm and even a sense of celebration. I just learned last night, we had a Sangha gathering, and a friend shared that if all of the organizations, groups that are working for change and healing the planet and, the alleviation of suffering right now, if they were read out, it would take 2.5 months of 24-hour reading to read through all those lists of names. But I want to read to you just a part of a reflection from the Hopi elders, the elders in Oribe, Arizona, and it's titled, "We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For." There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart, and they will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. See who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your vocabulary and attitude. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for. So, for me, what's very important, looking at how we can bring our practice into this time that is so in need of each of us standing firmly where we are and speaking our truth, speaking up, speaking out, is this sense of really being clear where we're coming from in our engagement. As James already spoke about, hatred is conquered by love. And so how do we keep coming back to strengthen this attitude of love and connection? I was in England and got to hear a storyteller named Martin Shaw at Schumacher College tell the story of Perseus, who went in the Greek legends, who was given the task to slay the goddess Medusa with hair of snakes. And the way he was able to do that, because her power was anyone who looked at her directly would be turned to stone. And so he was able to slay her by using his shield to look at her instead of looking at her directly. And Martin was saying that we all need a shield right now, because what we're looking at, what's happening in the world, is so overwhelming, can be so hard to absorb that it can turn us to stone if we look at it directly. And there are many ways that we can look into the shield. Mindfulness, our practice, community, arts. This encouragement from the Hopi elders to do everything in a spirit of celebration. This is what prevents us from burning out, from turning to stone, is taking good care of how we are engaging with all that we see needs to shift. When I was a nun in the community with Thich Nhat Hanh, we were in California with him, traveling from Southern California up to Northern California on September 11th, 2001, when the attacks happened in New York and other places. And we heard the news on the bus up the coast, and all of us were deeply disturbed and wanted to engage immediately into, writing press releases, getting information together so we could come out with a statement that would, help Thich Nhat Hanh, respond to this. He was about to give a public talk in Berkeley to thousands of people. So when we arrived in Northern California that night on the bus ride, we went to Thich. For those of you who aren't familiar, as students, we call Thich Nhat Hanh Thai, which is teacher in Vietnamese. So we presented him all these actions we wanted to take the next day to respond to what felt like such an urgent, such a difficult experience. And we were filled with all of that good heart and willingness, and also upset, of course, naturally. And Thich, listened to us and received us and said very firmly, I don't want you to do that tomorrow. Tomorrow we're all going to the beach. We're going to have some time for ourselves, and then we can do these things. And it was so surprising to us as a group of students. So we were so ready to get active immediately. And we went to the beach, and it was a beautiful day of playing together, swimming, connecting, calming, being, nourishing ourselves, taking care of ourselves. And it was from that place that we then the next day did all these actions to respond. And that has always stayed with me as a very powerful teaching, very counterintuitive, that I think our clearest action comes from a place of peaceful nourishment and centeredness and groundedness. So Thich was, basically saying what these elders were saying. This is a time of engagement, of celebration, not struggle, not fighting against, but taking care to calm ourselves so that, our action can come from that place of clearest seeing and knowing. And that's how I also see the shield, that we can address what really needs to be addressed in our world, but we have to take it on skillfully. And a wonderful teacher, Mushim Ikeda Nash, in the Bay Area, wrote a piece recently that was in the Lion's Roar, I believe. It's about vowing not to burn out. That all of us, as people who deeply care about what's happening, that we take a vow not to burn out. That we of course, we want to be very much engaged, be very much connected to the different movements around us, but how do we do that so that we're looking through the shield, not directly at what can turn our hearts to stone? And we have the capacity to respond in this moment. I remember going through quite a difficult time at one point as a nun, just before big retreats were to happen, and Thich was coming to our center to lead them, and I really felt I couldn't stay there and be in that situation of needing to carry a certain amount of responsibility, and I asked to leave to go to another monastery to wait out that time of many people, thousands of people coming for a retreat. And And the sisters said, we don't want you to do that. If you want to do that, you have to ask Tai directly. And if he says yes, then we'll let you go. So I went to Tai and I asked him and shared just how much I felt I didn't have space inside to go through this time with the whole community. And he listened, and he said, you do have what it takes to be in this situation. You can go through this moment, as overwhelming as it feels. And he said, the main thing you have to do is take refuge in your mindful breathing and your mindful steps. Everywhere you go throughout the day, wherever you're walking, whatever you're doing, come back and be with your breath, be with your steps. Because it's in our mind that we get overwhelmed. It's our thoughts that overwhelm us and make us feel that we can't handle the situation. But if we can stay with what's happening, with our body, with our breath, with our walking, eating. So when he said that, I actually relaxed, and I realized he was telling me the truth, that I did have the capacity to be with this moment. And I stayed, and I went through those retreats actually quite happily. And I was able to practice what he invited me to practice, being fully present. And, I'm holding on to that story with a lot of gratitude now, because as I feel overwhelmed when I am in touch with certain current events, and I know many people around me find it very difficult to keep our heads above water in this time as this river is flowing so fast. But I touch back to that moment and I see, yes, I do have what it takes to meet this moment. And this is this wisdom from our native elders. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones who are going to make this move. This we're going to veer this ship of humanity towards consciousness and not towards fear, as you pointed out, James. And each of us has the capacity to do this. We each have Buddha nature. We each have immense love, immense wisdom. And we need our daily moment-to-moment practice of awareness. That's our anchor. That's our refuge that keeps us from getting overwhelmed and burned out. And this quote from Clarissa Pinkola Estes has been very much in my heart also in these times. It was from a reflection she wrote after the election, and she says, "My friends, do not lose heart. We were made for these times. I have heard from so many recently who are deeply and properly bewildered. They are concerned about the state of affairs in our world now. You are right in your assessments. Yet I urge you, ask you, gentle you, to please not spend your spirit dry by bewailing these difficult times. Especially do not lose hope, most particularly because the fact is that we were made for these times. Yes, for years we have been learning, practicing, been in training for, and just waiting to meet on this exact plane of engagement." So to pick up on what James was saying earlier, that maybe Trump is the bodhisattva in disguise. Maybe we've all been waiting for Trump. Right this moment, all of our practice, all of the things we've been doing to develop ourselves, this is the time to, these events are sharpening our tools. They're what we're going to push up against to really be able to go deeper in our own practice, to create stronger communities. And this is it. This is it. So I will end there and see if James would like to begin our conversation.
Well, beautiful sharing. Wait, I'm just going to put my my timer on, so I know that we're in the on time. So we're going to talk for a few minutes together. First, thank you so much for what you shared. That's such a beautiful story about Ty saying, "Let's go to the beach and nourish ourselves, so we're not coming from that place of overwhelm." And I completely not only agree, but like to communicate that it's so, your actions are much more effective when you're coming from a place of centeredness and fullness and nourishment inside, so we have something to offer instead of the fear that can so easily be the source of your actions. And one thing that it reminds me, as you're saying about just finding your breath and coming back to yourself, that perhaps we could talk a little bit about together, is how compassion, which is the source of our caring heart, as Thich Nhat Hanh beautifully says, compassion is a verb, and want to express our caring, but how it can we can easily be overwhelmed by our caring or our suffering, unless it's held with another divine abode of equanimity that finds a spaciousness and a centeredness in the middle of that caring. Otherwise, it's too overwhelming. But when it's held in equanimity, the archetype that I love, that probably many of you are familiar with, is the Kuan Yin Bodhisattva, where she's in her relaxed repose, where she hears the cries of the world and responds, but she is at ease and centered, so her actions are that much more effective. So I'm just wondering, I know that you said coming back to your breath and just being here in the moment is one of the most powerful ways to find that center. Anything else that you find helpful, or that you can share when we're so overwhelmed and just coming back to your breath isn't enough, and maybe it's going to the beach, as you said, but any other thoughts you have about how equanimity can hold compassion?
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Pointing to this. I really see that it's important to observe our thoughts. I know that for me, when I get into a space of overwhelm, I'm just like almost chanting to myself, "This is too much for me. I can't do this." And that's really, it's very important to notice what's going on, to notice how we're feeding off of our own thoughts. It can be a pretty toxic source of food. And I had a really difficult moment this spring where I went through a period of insomnia and different health issues, and just a lot of things kind of compounded, plus everything that was going on, in our country and world. And I remember just being in bed early in the morning, not being able to sleep, wondering how I was going to get through that day. And a voice inside just came up very strongly and said, "Get up, just get up." Don't stay in this place of consuming these unhelpful thoughts. And so I think, part of the equanimity is realizing what is it that I'm telling myself? Because most of the time it's not true. And in order to see something, what you were talking about, this wider, bigger perspective, we actually need to get up and out of the prison of our minds. So we need ways to break through what can be pretty confining patterns of thinking. so we need to, first of all, see that that's what we're doing to ourselves when we get overwhelmed. And then I think it's important to identify some emergency exit plans ahead of time. You know, like that each of us should have some things we know to do when we begin to feel like, you know, just coming back to our breath isn't enough. Is it that we call someone? Is it that, you know, as Michael Moore invited us all to do at the Women's March, he said, establish a group of 5 people that you have to call whenever things begin to, you know, every time there's an emergency and you need an emergency response team, whether it's all of you calling your senators or all of you going to some kind of march or demonstration or all of you writing, you know, all of you somehow taking action together, that you have a small group of people that you can be in touch with immediately in response to whatever it is. So that could be one of the, you know, emergency plans, but that we each identify ways that we can help ourselves out of these moments of real difficulty. I'm curious to hear how you would respond to that same question.
Well, you know, it seems to be that is one of the main issues, that how practice operates. And one thing that I keep in mind, or try to keep in mind, that I like to encourage others to keep in mind, is just getting a sense, compassion and equanimity working together, and that compassion, we're right there connected to the suffering, and equanimity is a kind of spaciousness, and to see that balance where they support each other, where there's a connection and a centeredness. And if we're getting too close, or so close that it's the caring without the spaciousness, it becomes you know, disorienting or contracting, or the mind starts spinning its stories. But if we're too back and disconnected, yeah, there's a spaciousness, you know, well, whatever. And sometimes that means going to the beach, but if we're just on the beach and forget about coming back, that's not it too. So it's a continual monitoring. How can I stay connected in my caring and find that balance and that non-struggle? And so that's just one thing that I keep in mind, where feeling the sublime state of compassion, which requires suffering, but feeling a spaciousness. And for me, coming back to the moment, as you say, reaching out to a friend, being inspired, seeing what information you're taking in. You know, I can, when I often go to the Huffington Post, and you know, I'm saying, you know, oh my God, I can't believe it. And I also need to, for my own sake, this is my thing, watch Rachel Maddow most every night. She's saying the possibilities, and getting people together, and just finding inspiration. And another thing that you say so beautifully is, you know, find something that you can do. I love a quote from Angeles Arrien, a very wise woman who passed away a couple of years ago, where she says, action absorbs anxiety. And that if we don't know what to do with that energy, just expressing our caring, it's not up to you to save the whole world. That's too much. Some way to express your caring, even if it's with somebody right near you, it kind of releases that that bottled up energy. And being with like-minded friends, I think that's one of the main keys in this, at this time. It's getting people together. And Nelson Mandela called it the multiplicity of courage, where when we're not alone, we feel something bigger than ourselves. And I love the studies that I've read, where if you hold somebody's hand, both physiologically, this is in hospitals and in different situations, they've looked at this where if you're holding somebody's hand, your capacity for pain, physiological pain, and emotional pain is much greater. You don't get overwhelmed because there's a sharing of that caring instead of thinking that it's all connected. And so being part of something bigger than yourself changes that helplessness into empowerment.
Yes. Yes.
Those are some things that I keep in mind.
Thank you. That is so important. This, reminder that, this is too big for any of us to encounter alone, and we have to meet this, with others. And
I have another question. I'm curious about what your response is. Again, since we have some time, so there is, the disbelief and the, how can they do what they're doing? How do you bring your practice? How do you hold the frustration or the anger where your heart can open, where hatred does not cease by hatred? How do you get in touch with whether it's forgiveness or understanding or whatever, both to the supporters of that agenda who maybe don't connect all the dots, or the perpetrators of that agenda who seem to know very well what they're doing? How do you move with that so your heart doesn't harden?
I was teaching a retreat, and someone mentioned that they had read an article about Trump wanting, being open to guidance from the Dalai Lama or Thai, that if they were available, he would want to listen to them. And I noticed how much that softened my heart. This sense of thinking of him as being perhaps open to, other kinds of wisdom. And then we researched it and found out it was a fake news article. But it was wonderful for me to have that experience of softening my heart and feeling this sense of connection, of really like taking in, like, well, if it were me, who had the opportunity to be present with our president and or a group of people, how would that shift things? Versus me looking at him as someone very other, very, on the opposite end of the spectrum or something, but rather, as someone that might be open to listening and engaging. So I think, since then, I just try to keep that possibility alive of, like, everyone who thinks differently from me is also still has a ground of organic seeds in their mind consciousness that can be watered in ways that are maybe quite surprising. That none of us is a finished work written in stone. So how to keep the sense of openness that not writing off anyone. But I think really it's, I feel what's so important in any kind of media that I take in about what's going on, and yes, where I have the same reaction of, oh my God, again, is what that does to me. Because if I begin to hate, that's poison in me. And so it's not even about so much whether my attitude changes someone else. but I cripple myself if I begin to
Mm.
see these other human beings as, other than my brothers and sisters, or, fellow humans
Mhm.
sharing this planet with me.
Mm.
Um, so I feel like it's really important for me to look at my own heart.
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah, it's like the Buddha saying, having anger and holding on to anger towards somebody is like picking up a hot coal and trying to hurt them and not realizing you're the one that's getting burned.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what you say. And I know we probably should open it up in a moment. Just have a thought to share on this as well. That the Buddha, one of the names of the Buddha, one of his monikers is the teacher of those who could be taught.
Mm.
That not everybody could be taught.
Mm-hmm.
There was Devadatta trying to do him in,
Mm-hmm.
and a whole lot of others that tried to discredit him. And so it might be maybe not realistic, or you never know. But then there's also Angulimala, who was a serial killer and supposedly killed 999 people, and then he woke up. So there is that possibility. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think if somebody said to Donald Trump, "Oh, if you do this, if you see that saving the planet is important, you will have the greatest legacy," he might think, "Oh, okay, I'll go for that."
Mm-hmm.
He can change in a moment. He changes all the time.
Mm.
But not to hold on to that as, will that happen, but to see it as a possibility.
Mm.
And in the meantime, just seeing the pain and the confusion and it's really sad when I see him come out with whatever the new thing that he comes out. It's like, this is such a misguided individual who is not internally happy. There's a kind of compassionate understanding for his own causes and conditions and genetics and all the factors that make him who he is, and seeing it's real ignorance in the Buddhist sense of the word, where just not seeing clearly where well-being and happiness lies, and then having fierce compassion to do whatever I can, not to say, "Oh well, that's just the way it is," but to do my part.
Yes.
Without the hatred. That's
Yeah.
that's an ongoing practice. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
So yeah. So maybe should we open it up to questions now? Or?
Yeah, and now's a good time for Q&A, and we have a couple of questions already coming in. Let me first address Michael's question. He asks, how do you get beyond the tendency to think that we are right and they are wrong? I see a danger in this. So either James or Kaira Jewel.
Do you?
Well, I think it's important to not shy away from action and engagement that you feel is coming from wisdom and from collective wisdom and insight. And we can mindfully engage and resist and speak out about things, about other people. And it's not that we do it with the understanding or belief that they are wrong as people, but the ignorance in them is harmful. The violence, the discrimination, is harmful and needs to be taken on strongly with fierce compassion, as James mentioned. So there's a training in the 14 mindfulness trainings of the Order of Interbeing that were created by Thai during the war in Vietnam. And one of them says, I will speak out against injustice, even if doing so may put me in danger, may put me in difficulty. So but still we do it from this place of clarity, of love, of real wishing to reconcile. So I think also of Martin Luther King and, in his whole exploration of the beloved community. He was saying it's not that we want to kill the segregationists or eliminate the segregationists. We want to eliminate the idea of segregation and then include all of those people who held those views, in our community. It's not about getting rid of anyone, but how do we challenge the ignorance that's at the basis of where they're coming from? And I don't think we need to apologize for calling that out. And there are things happening now that need to be called out clearly, but we're not against those people. We don't want to eliminate Trump. I don't want to eliminate Trump. I want to really get to the root of where those views come from, to heal them in all of us. Because part of this is it's not just that these ideas are in the people we oppose, they're in us too. And that's why this taking good care of looking at where we're coming from before we engage in action, because we can make the situation worse. We can cause greater separation, and we don't want to do that.
Just a brief comment on that. For me, one of the most beautiful teachings in all of spirituality is Jesus on the cross saying, "Forgive them, they know not what they do." And just to really see the ignorance, or the not seeing. Ignorance in this sense means not seeing clearly. It's not a pejorative kind of a thing. It's just to understand what would shape somebody's mind to have their reality that would continue the othering or the fear or the greed or the causing suffering. Not seeing that causing suffering does not lead to happiness. And the more I can, and the shame and the anger and the fear that, say, somebody who is a supporter of what's going on feels, the more I can understand their reality and not say they're wrong. That's what the Buddha talked about a lot. He said, don't be attached to views and opinions. Have your understanding and your view and opinion, but just see that there's lots of different realities. And the more I can come from understanding and trying to understand all the causes and conditions and factors that would make somebody think that way, the more I can address those fears and those legitimate concerns and those that anger, so that my action is not alienating, is not othering, but is really wanting to listen and have the person, the people feel that they're heard. So, okay, this is unjust to you in this situation, and to others. How can we truly include everybody in the society of well-being? So that othering, the more it's on either side, it's just causing separation. So this is, I think, an important part of our practice, to forgive through compassionate understanding of another's reality. One last thing, I'm remembering the Dalai Lama has this beautiful teaching. He says, if somebody is doing something that is upsetting to you, it's important to understand that they're usually not doing it in order to hurt you, but it's just that their internal reality is intersecting with your internal reality in a way that doesn't match up your hopes and expectations. And so the more we can understand the other's internal reality, the greater we have the possibility of opening our hearts, or keeping our hearts open, and having our action that much more effective.
Thank you, James and Kaira Joel. That's quite deep. Want to get to this question from Jesse. How do we respond to people who say that being mindful is too much of a passive approach for real change? That's a great question.
Would you like to go first, James?
Sure. For me, mindfulness is just bringing awareness to whatever the situation is. And it does not preclude action at all. The more your action can come from a place of clarity and presence and goodwill, the more effective your action is going to be. So if you think that mindfulness is just sitting around and finding some inner peace, you're really missing out on the essence of what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is not just sitting quietly, passively. It's being present as you're in a demonstration, but to come from love. It's being present when you are standing up to injustice in a very skillful way, so that there's not alienation. It's being present with somebody who's hurting. And it's being present first as well to feel your own pain and your sorrow and your emotions, and holding them skillfully and processing them so that they're not the place that you come from, but as you've processed it, then you can come from that wisdom and love that's able to process it and have your actions that much more effective. So I think it needs a reframe of the definition of what mindfulness is.
And I would also like to add that I think we do need to own in those criticisms of mindfulness that I think there is truth that in our communities of practice there has been a tendency in our spiritual communities, I would say, towards taking care of ourselves and calming our own minds, and less of an emphasis in many of our Buddhist communities on engagement. And that's why what you quoted of Bhikkhu Bodhi is so important, that we really do need, I think, more messages, and we need to focus as spiritual communities on how we can really engage and respond. So I just want to acknowledge that criticism, we need to listen to that humbly, and see where are we doing that as practitioners, and come together to see how we can make sure that our mindful practice isn't too disengaged from what's actually happening in the world. I think it's something we always need to be kind of self-critical of, or attuned to. And it's something I wanted to bring up too in the previous question, is there's a wonderful PDF that's online of a book called A Delicate Activism. And it's coming from activists in South Africa. And they use the word delicate together with activism because they emphasize how important it is that we always are checking in with ourselves. Because one thing that happens when we begin, to engage and want to make changes, we get married to an idea. As what you said, James, earlier, but we get attached to our views. And that can actually take our work in the opposite direction of where we need to be going. So a constant recalibrating, re-looking at, is this action really in response to what's happening, or is it in response to my reactivity?
Mm.
or to my attachment to how things should be. So a constant kind of checking in with ourselves. And that's where spiritual practice and activism really can help each other. As spiritual practitioners, we need to always be checking in. Are we not engaged enough? And as activists, we need to be constantly listening in. Am I losing sight of what's the bigger picture because I'm so attached to what I feel needs to happen, that we alienate ourselves from the very people we need to work together with?
Mm-hmm.
So this mindfulness is not at all opposed to activism, because that's what helps us stay connected to what's really true, so that we can respond with what's appropriate in that moment.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Kaira, Jewel, and James. Just a reminder that folks can send in their questions through the Q&A button. And if you have a preference as to which teacher that you want to address your question to, please indicate that in your Q&A, in the Q&A button. Linda has a question, and let me just read this here. I have anger that Trump would, in the 1.7 trillion of budget cutbacks, would try to eliminate all of these social service disability benefits that my injured my son, who has a permanent head injury, would suffer from. Where do I direct my anger to something productive, like supporting impeachment along with Pierce and Paul Ryan?
Wait, you mean Pence, probably? Pence.
Yes, Pence, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for the question. It's a really real, very important thing. I mean, I'm also hoping I won't lose my insurance, and I know many of us are this could happen within the week if this vote is carried out, that Republicans are trying to force through the government. I think making sure that there is, are there people that you can connect with who are also going through this and caring deeply about this, that allow for a collective way to engage with preserving healthcare for those who truly, without which their lives would really be very dire. And still, working from this place of, what do we want to manifest? I remember when I had the chance to work with a friend who was part of the Transition Town movement that started in the UK. She said they began their meetings discussing all the things that they didn't want that were happening and that needed to change. And she said they lost all of their energy focusing on what wasn't working in their society. And when they switched the focus of their meetings to what did they want to see happen, what did they really want to see manifest, then they had all this energy. So I would say it's again this image of looking through the shield at Medusa. This Trump care is Medusa, and if we look at it too long, it's gonna harm us. So, but how can we work with others towards what we really want? If it's preserving Obamacare, insurance for everyone, this Our Revolution movement of Bernie Sanders and progressives in government, they hold calls on a regular basis to gather people's visions for what do we want. So that might be a place, or if you know of other groups that are working on insurance for everyone, universal care. To me, that's something that motivates me. you know, and for some we may be motivated by working against what is really unjust, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but I also want to say, look at how that affects you and what keeps you going, what keeps you motivated. And I think being in the presence of others who have a real insightful vision keeps us energized. Yeah.
Reminds me of another line that I love from Andrew Harvey, who says, "Follow your heartbreak. You know, follow where your heart is breaking, and that's the place that you're motivated and you have juice and energy to make a difference, and then find others who share your caring or your situation." And it's one of the beautiful things in the last few months, the whole indivisible movement of finding like-minded people and going to your congressman or congresswoman and seeing how your energy can contribute to a more positive vision. It's that, that action absorbs anxiety that I mentioned before. But see where your heart is breaking and find others so you're not alone. And what can I do in my little way? It makes all the difference in the world. And especially when you're not alone, doing it alone.
Thank you, James and Kaira Joel. I have a question here from Tim. What kind of meditation mindfulness practices are you doing to prevent burnout?
Go ahead. Yes.
Well, first, the basic mindfulness practice of just being here in the moment, as Kaira Joel mentioned, just coming back to your breath or coming back to the moment. That's the start. There's true refuge in the moment, and then within that, holding your feelings. I don't know if you're familiar with the RAIN acronym that we often teach on retreats, where you're holding your feelings and just seeing and recognizing, what am I feeling? That's the R, and allowing it to be here and investigating or feeling how the energy manifests in your body and not identifying with it, not taking it personally, just more and more learning how to hold our feelings. And then, of course, there's loving kindness practice, where you're kind to yourself and sending yourself or others who open your heart, and then you can work up to the advanced and send it to Donald Trump and his gang, or the self-compassion practice, like I mentioned before. Just really, you start by holding the overwhelm in a very kind way, and all of those bringing a kind awareness to the moment. My basic instruction for mindfulness is noticing what's happening right now and opening to it with a very kind and interested and relaxed awareness. And then when I have enough of a centeredness, my actions can come from a more skillful place.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I've been very inspired by a book by Margaret Wheatley lately, in the last few years, called So Far From Home. And she talks a lot about acting without expectation, without that we don't do what we do because we know it's going to succeed. That's not the motivation for how we engage. We do what we do because it has to be done, because there's nothing else we could do. Even if we know it's going to fail, we need to do it. And I think that is a really important message for me. That's prevention for burnout. Is we act with freedom. We're free from the outcome. We know it's right, but we don't know if it's going to work.
Mm.
We trust in that vision that we have, and we do our best, and that's all we can do.
Mm.
You know.
It, it reminds me another thing, another book that I was going to mention, Joanna,
Yes.
book, Active Hope.
Similar. Yes.
A really, really powerful, beautiful book.
Yeah.
How to face the mess we're in without going crazy. And
Yeah.
she defines active hope. She used to hate the word hope. She said, I don't want to hear about hope because it's, it seems airy-fairy. And then she's adopted and said, we need to have hope, but in a more skillful way. And she defines active hope as identifying the outcomes we hope for, and then playing our part in bringing them about, focusing on what we deeply long for, and then proceeding to take determined steps in that direction, becoming an active participant in bringing about what we hope for. Without the outcome, it's not a pass-fail test.
Yes.
This is what inspires me and moves me.
Yeah.
And then you're doing your part in facing in the right direction.
Yep. Beautiful. And the other piece I would add too is that I feel that when I take in information about what's going on, what prevents me from wallowing in or getting stuck in something that feels like it leads to burnout is transmuting that feeling into constructive action. So I get texts every day that offer you daily actions to call the Senate, to call Congress about a different issue each day, and I try to do that on a regular basis. I just called my senators today about making sure there's a public hearing for the Trump Care plan. But I noticed there was a beautiful suggestion by Laura Hunter on the chat saying, when we were talking about healthcare, saying she hopes everyone who will be affected by healthcare will make a video of themselves and send it to the organization in their area so that people really see what will happen if this new bill gets passed. So a lot of my news comes through action emails where I can sign a petition or call someone or write a letter and I feel like that's a healthy way for me to avoid burnout, is engage with something versus just passively consuming news all throughout the day. I do feel it's important to stay informed, but I like to have that transfer directly into an action that feels meaningful to me. And that's, for each of us, that's a different thing. It may be deciding to go care for someone that needs some care, or reconciling with someone that you need to reconcile with. It might even, it might not be anything political, but it might be, okay, I'm seeing that this kind of division is happening all around me. What can I do to decrease that division in my own small circle?
So, and that's lovely. And something else that you reminded me as you said that is one of the big things for me from the teachings, gratitude practice for all that's good. And for all the caring that is out there.
Yes.
And another aspect of the nourishing yourself, kind of like the going to the beach that Thich Nhat Hanh suggested, which is straight out of the Buddha's teaching. What I try to communicate in Awakening Joy is the Buddha saying not only to guard against unwholesome states or overcome them when they're here, but to cultivate wholesome states. And when they're here, to maintain and increase wholesome states, not by trying to hold on or grasp them, that just turns them into an unwholesome state, but just by noticing, not missing moments of well-being, not missing when you're touched by life, or when you're touched by somebody's caring, or when you have just a spontaneous, random act of kindness coming through you. And just the Buddha says, notice here in one example, he says, when there's generosity that arises, he says, think to yourself, I'm being generous now. And let yourself feel how good it feels for generosity to arise. And really let it register, because when you can mindfully let it register, it's not just, I'm feeling pretty good right now, but you're saying, this is what it feels like to feel good. And just taking a few moments of that nourishment, gratitude expands your container so that there's more space for all the pain and the sorrow and the dukkha. So gratitude and opening to the wholesome
Yeah.
moments in your life, and expressing your love, all support that anti-burnout.
And I'll just add one other thing, because I've noticed a number of people with this concern, like, am I doing enough? I feel like I'm just doing my own little, I'm in my own little community doing, I'm more behind the scenes, or I'm not, my health doesn't allow me to be as active as I used to be. So is that okay? And I just want to really say we can just do what we can do, and we need to work in our own corner of the universe. And I think, and Suzuki Roshi also said something I just heard recently, I can't remember exactly, but something like, we need to act where we can act, So I think having confidence and gratitude, as James was just speaking about, what we can do in our own sphere of influence. And also, I think, always looking for ways that we can be more connected. But if we are giving ourselves the message that what we're doing isn't enough,
Yeah.
that's gonna, we want to keep widening our heart. It's the same with our practice, right? Like, we're not enlightened yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And telling ourselves that we're not okay because we're not enlightened is not helping us get to enlightenment. So we want to affirm where we are now, keep growing, keep opening our hearts to get more connected, more engaged, to stay informed, but really affirm ourselves for what we are able to do in this moment, and know that we're doing our best, and affirm that. And I think that will lead to more ways to be connected, and to work with others that give us a sense of, yes, this is good. What I'm doing is really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, much more energizing to, rather than feeling guilty about what you're not doing,
Yes.
to feel moved and inspired and enriched by what you are, even if it's just what you're doing is enough. Because if you're coming from fullness, then there's a joy that other people are moved by. I love Julia Butterfly Hill's concept of coming from a joyful responsibility. Joyful responsibility. There's a responsibility, but come from joy, not from guilt or anger or shame or whatever. Come from a place of, oh yes, I'm contributing in my own way. That's much more inspiring and magnetizing for others.
Thank you for that, James and Kaira Jewel. I just want to acknowledge the time. We're at 12:33. And I realize that we have many more questions to go, but I just want to respect folks' time. There were a number of questions about receiving a recording after the event, and if you registered, you will receive 1 to 2 days after we close here a link to the recording of this webinar. And we have time for, I think, one more question, and this is, I think, really pertinent to a lot of people, an intense question from Georgina, and as I said, pertinent to a lot of people. She writes that recently I had a couple of anxiety attacks, and I'm having all sorts of questions, some of which scare me a lot. So my questions would be to you: how do I overcome my fears? For instance, the possibility of having another attack or feelings as if I would die. And I assume a big contributor to this is our current state of affairs.
I would say thank you for this question. I think it's you're not alone in experiencing this, and I would invite you to be present to the strength that you might have in you in this moment, just to appreciate your solidity that has brought you to this webinar, and to look for the different elements in your life that express your strength, that express your capacity to be with difficulty, and to really see that the anxiety is there in you, and other things are also there in you. That you're not only your anxiety, you're also your awareness that's aware of what you're going through. You're also, your joy, your friendship with others, your capacity to take care of yourself in different ways. So just to not minimize the experience of anxiety, but see it within this larger frame of everything else that makes up who you are. And, I understand the fear that the anxiety will come again. And you made it through those anxiety attacks. So that anxiety didn't last forever either. So something in you had the capacity to withstand that and to come through it. And so knowing that, you can know that if it arises, you can meet it again. And perhaps looking at what's the food that has brought about the anxiety attacks. And this was the teaching of the Buddha, that nothing can survive without food. And so our suffering, we need to understand, where does it come from? And we need to cut that source of food. So whatever it is that is nourishing that, we need to try to avoid consuming it. And I know this isn't always possible because we live in an interconnected reality. But as James mentioned earlier, how can we take in what's nourishing, what's inspiring for us, and keep those mind states stronger and stronger in our mind, so that when we do encounter things that are very difficult to face, we're less likely to be overwhelmed. We have more resilience because we're always bringing in what's positive and nourishing and healing into our mind, because that's food too.
And all of that is really skillful and wise. And I would also add, just in a very practical way, when you're starting to get overwhelmed, a few things, and you might also check out working with panic and anxiety. Actually, John Kabat-Zinn has a chapter in Full Catastrophe Living, and there's some different techniques that you might just work with somebody, maybe to share, but a couple that you might keep in mind. One is, as I said before, just putting your hand on your heart and physiologically comforting yourself and holding yourself, or hugging yourself, and releasing some oxytocin, or getting a hug from somebody, just in a very simple, practical way. Another, when you are activated, especially if there's trauma that's activated, to find different ways to resource yourself in addition to this. You might just open your eyes and look around and just reorient yourself. Oh yeah, there's the clock. Oh, there's the light. There's that. And just for a few moments, and the Buddha talks about this in one of his discourses. He calls it forgetfulness and inattention, or it's called forgetfulness and inattention. It's a third strategy for dealing with distracting thoughts, where you pay attention to some place that is connecting. Sometimes the breath works, but sometimes your breath is so stirred up that it's hard to stay with that, or feeling your body. But just looking around visually and reorienting yourself, and touching it a little at a time, back and forth, along with loving kindness and reaching out to a friend and things like that. But little by little, there's practices that work with anxiety that you're just touching and it's like you're starting by lifting, 5-pound weights, and then more and more you have those resources for you when things really become intense. So what do you think, Stephen? Is it time to close?
Thank you, James.
Hmm.
Thank you, James and Kaira Jewel, for that. Let me just highlight myself. Now I want to hand it back to you, James, for the closing meditation.
Okay, we'll just do a short close and metta and dedication of merit. And I've been asked, Stephen asked me at this part, just to remind people about supporting Parallax and our being here. And when you go to the home screen, there's one window that where you have an opportunity to offer dana. Well, there it is. He's putting it right up on the screen. And your support is much appreciated, both for Parallax and for us as well. So that would be lovely, and one way to express any kind of value that you got from this. Even more beyond that, let your generosity spill over into action that is moving towards making this a better world. There's lots of different ways that you can express your caring and your generous heart. So with that, I'll just invite us all to connect within ourselves, come inside, and appreciate spending this time together. There's something in you that was drawn to do that and to want to make this a better world. Just let yourself enjoy the wholesomeness of that caring heart. And wish yourself well. May I see clearly and not act from fear and anger, but share my love well and my caring. And may our time here together, any good and merit that we gain by coming here together and supporting each other, may it ripple out and be shared with all and be of benefit to all beings everywhere. May all be free of fear and confusion. May all see clearly the causes of happiness and be agents of that happiness. May all wake up to the best inside themselves and know the highest happiness and peace. And may we include this beautiful planet Earth that supports us so generously and magnificently. May we all be agents of healing for the planet and for all species living in this planet, and out be shared with all beings in all directions everywhere. May all know the highest happiness and peace.